All right, mates, welcome back to the channel. JL Scott Fishing and Eats. Hope everybody's doing well. We're going to talk about something. I know this might be a little bit controversial for a lot of people, and I'm not here to, ruffle too many people's feathers, but just giving another perspective. Because I've talked to a couple anglers. First of all, I want to thank out one of my followers on JL Scott Fishing and Eats page for bringing this to my attention, for me to do a little bit more research into it, make a couple calls, even some out-of-state calls, obviously in Virginia, but obviously down. I made some calls in South Carolina, some calls in Tennessee, from where there's heavily scheduled fishing tournaments, and what anglers are seeing in their fisheries. Okay, and this is not new. Okay, we've known this for a while. We've just chose to ignore it, and eventually it's going to catch up with our fisheries. Okay, so this is more of a fishery perspective on what may be happening in your fishery that you aren't really recognizing yet, but it's in the beginning stages to where you are going to see this happen. And if you live in Maryland, okay, or you even have come to the Upper Bay at any time for a tournament, you automatically should know this to be true. If you've ever fished in the sassafras, which is a trib, okay, of the Upper Bay, which used to be crazy lights out, okay? And it hasn't been for a number of years. In fact, if you look at a lot of tournament results, whether it's kayak fishing or boating related, you'll look at the net that was sass only, way down. Like half of the field, no limits, no bass, okay? To such an extent that a lot of those, especially in the kayak fishing community, are no longer scheduling the sassafras. They'll include it in an Upper Bay event, but no longer just scheduling the sass, okay? Why is that? Well, the same thing is happening in Virginia, in the Chickahominy, which has been a premier fishery onto itself, but it gets lumped in with the James River, okay? And the correlations are absolutely the same. And people just keep denying it and denying it and denying it. And I am not here to bash or tournament fishing, okay? Everyone wants tournament fishing to continue, although, well, I shouldn't say everybody. There are people who want to end tournament fishing on some of these fisheries, especially in my state. There are people who are lobbying Annapolis to restrict more and more tournaments from being scheduled on the Upper Bay and on the Potomac out of Maryland. It's just happening. Doesn't mean that the legislation will get passed. Doesn't mean it'll make its way to DNR. Doesn't mean, okay, there's also a Black Bass Advisory Council committee, right, that looks at all these things and a lot of times make proposals, okay, that will directly impact you and me as anglers, okay? And a lot of people are unaware of those proposals because they're not involved, okay? But if you're recognizing in your area where you like to fish over the years, if you're like me and you fish the same areas for 20, 30 years, you have a barometer, okay, that tournament anglers don't have. Professional anglers, okay, I respect what they do, but they come to the James River once a year or maybe twice if it's an open and an elite. Hadn't been there in a while, I don't think. It's been an open or an MLF event on the Potomac. You come once or twice, right? As opposed to people who are engaged in fishing all season long throughout the seasons on a river for 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 years. Recognize what's happened with grass, habitat, river composition, fish, forage, snakehead, flathead cat, all this stuff, okay? If you're coming into town for 5 or 6 days, you're fishing an event, and then you're going on to the next event. It's not really registering. Why you freaking didn't finish in the top 50 when 2 years ago when you came, you were like in the top 20. And you went back to the same area, and this time didn't produce. Why didn't it produce? Well, Let's get into it. Let's see what Virginia has to say. And I'm not knocking the Virginia DWR at all. I'm just giving a counter point of view as a hot take here. Okay, like it just doesn't register with me, and it doesn't register with a lot of people that I've talked to either. Okay, because a lot of this stuff is making a lot of assumptions, and really, there's no real data to really support it. I mean, because you don't really know till you catch a tagged fish, or you don't really know what's really happening with those bass, tagged fish or not. And if you're not catching the tagged fish, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not there. Like there's too many unknowns here. So this is a largemouth bass tagging project, assesses fish translocation between the Chickahominy and the James River. You could easily substitute the Sassafras River and the Upper Bay. Okay? Easily do that. You can easily do that in a number of places. Okay? And here's my argument to why some of this is not going to make any sense to people. If you're like me and like so many of my followers and you fish for smallies in the Allegheny, the Monocacy, and the Upper Potomac, okay, and upper reaches of the Shenandoah, okay, or the Maury River, or even parts of the New River, okay, or the Rapidan, okay, that's what I call Rapidan, okay. We don't see this issue with our smallmouth. We don't see translocation issues with our smallmouth and with our smallmouth populations. Our populations are impacted by high rising water events and flood stage events, right? They're not impacted by boater tournaments. They're not impacted by these events that draw 200 boaters or 150 kayakers, right, into a fishery, right? Kayakers are a little bit different. I'm going to get to that in a second. So they don't deal with translocation. They deal with mortality and often consumption rates, because there are people who do take bass out of those rivers and consume them. Okay, a lot of bank people, a lot of weight. We know that to be true. Okay, but we don't have to deal with our populations being impacted by this. And this is why you're seeing so many citation smallmouth being taken in the Maury, in the Roanoke, in the New, in the Shenandoah, in the Upper Potomac. Okay? This is why, mates. And why you're seeing less and less and less citations being taken of largemouth bass in known areas historically for those biggins to be. Right? So why is that? What is translocation? Translocation is when you catch a fish, and in this case, the Chickahominy, okay, or the Sassafras River, in a tournament, and you put that fish in your live well, and you take that fish to your weigh-in. Look on a map, mates. Okay? If you're fishing in the Chickahominy, okay, and you want to go from, say, Riverfront Park, okay, on the Chick, in a truck to get to Osborne Landing in Henrico County, which hosts most bass, MLF, and every major boating event on the James River, that's about 40 miles. Now, that's by vehicle, okay? So by boat, just kind of figure it out. You're taking all those bass out of the Chickahominy River during its spawn, mates, okay? Same with the Sass. That's been the problem, okay? These events are scheduled in April and May during the prime spawning season of these largemouth bass. They're being caught in Chickahominy River. They're being translocated via a live well and a bass boat 20, 25 miles upriver in the James to Osborne Landing, where they are then being... There's no barge at most of these events, mates. Okay? There's no relocating the bass where they were caught, mates. Okay? If you've ever been to Anchor's Marina in the Upper Bay, at a club event, a major event, a BFL event, anything like that, they're weighing those fish, bringing them in the bags, and throwing them in the chute, and that chute's taking them right down into the marina, okay, water of the Upper Bay with the Northeast River, okay? They're not being taken back to the Sass. They're not being taken back to elk. They're not being taken back to any of the rivers where they were spawning. Does anyone realistically believe that more than 10% of bass are going to actually return to where their traditional or ancestral, whatever you want to call it, flats were? How many bass released at Anchors Marina in Northeast Upper Bay are going to make it back to the Susquehanna Flats? How many? We don't know until we track them, which would be a more of a thing to do more and more of. But of course, the expense involved, they can't do that on a wide scale where they would track every single bass ever released from a major bass or MLF competition. Okay, the expense, I'm sure that would be the argument why they wouldn't do that. But this is where, from the Virginia's perspective, you can see the tag. It's a tag right up in there. Where they're studying these fish, okay? The James Chickahominy rivers boast strong smallmouth bass fisheries that attract anglers from across the country and host tournaments of varying sizes. Yeah. Large tournaments typically launch in the James River. That would be Osborne Landing, which in itself offers excellent bass fishing, connects anglers to the adjoining waters such as the Chick. Because the Chickahomony's reputation as a productive fishery, many anglers travel between the Chick and the James Rivers to fish. Okay? Most people you will find in a major event will be in basically two areas of the James River or in the Chick. Back in the Chick, in the pads, in the grass. It is has been a wonderful fishery for the last 2 decades. During 2020, invasive Alabama bass were detected. Okay, we know that to be true in a tributary. So that's another thing that Virginia is working on now. It's not as big a deal yet in Maryland, but Virginia is dealing with trying to combat a potential Alabama spotted bass invasive run into the state. And what I will say about that is, if you're finding spotted bass in a landlocked lake or reservoir, you know somebody put it there. Okay? It's different when it's tribs and creeks where they make their way up. Okay? Just like we see with crawfish, right? They make their way through tribs and streams and creeks and all that in their major river systems, and then when they show up, right? If they're showing up in your landlocked reservoir or landlocked lake or pond, that means somebody put them there illegally. So just remember that when your largemouth bass start to get stymied and stifled and their growth gets stunted because of spotted bass. Okay? 2021, the Virginia Department of Wildlife began a largemouth bass tagging project to assess fish movement between the James and Chickahominy rivers. Fish movement. Okay? That would indicate that they're tracking fish, how fish naturally move within, and we've talked about this on my channel about how I really believe that smallmouth bass in a lot of our river systems will move 6 to 8 miles. That is just how I feel. If you're out on the river as much as I am, and you know where a place where it's been hot, suddenly goes dead, and you're 3, 4, 5 miles down or upstream suddenly is on fire, you know the bass are moving. Okay? Goals of the project were to estimate translocation between rivers, assess the impact of translocation on the Chickahominy River bass population. Okay? Because they know people are taking bass. Okay? During the spawn. And they're being released all the way up to James River on the way to Richmond. Okay? They're not going back to the Chick. Okay? So DWR tagged 648 preferred size. That's 12 inches or more. Same thing with register in your kayak bass fishing tournament, right? 12 inches for the most part. Throughout Chickahominy with the red dart tags and monitored movement via angler reports and partnerships with Bass, the Bass Federation, etc. So if an angler even if you're out on the weekend, you catch a tagged bass, okay, you're releasing it. You're not putting it in your live well. It's not a tournament. The theory is it will be reported to let DWR know where that bass actually was. This is because non-tournament anglers targeting Chickahominy River bass overwhelmingly launch from and stay within the Chickahominy River. Exactly. If you're launching a kayak and you're going fishing in the Chick, you're not launching from Osborne Landing. Okay, you're not launching from the James River. Okay, it's just too far, right? You're launching from inside the Chickahominy, most likely from riverfront or other destinations. There's also Chickahominy Lake, all that good stuff. Non-tournament anglers were responsible for 0.3 of the observed translocation to the James River. How do they know that? How could they possibly know that? Because if you're a non-tournament angler, the assumption is you're keeping a bass in the Chickahominy River. Why? Just to release it in the James. That doesn't make any sense. Okay? I don't know of any angler that's legitimately that's keeping bass in a live well during pre-fishing or during a non-tournament event, just recreationally fishing, that's not planning on consuming it. Doesn't matter whether it's walleye, bass, catfish, whatever. Okay. So again, I don't know where that number comes from. Additionally, reported tag bass released in the James River by anglers were later reported as being caught in the Chickahominy River. Because of the long distance, greater than 35 miles, like I was saying, mates, it is likely that these fish were translocated by anglers. This indicates movement in both directions between the two rivers. Okay, what I want to highlight here, mates, is that indicates an unnatural movement of bass within a river system. A natural movement would be these smallies moving from Old Dam 2 up above Seneca to deeper water naturally of their own volition, meaning following forage or scattering due to a high water event or any of those things. It's not natural to take a spawning fish that weighs 5.5 pounds off its bed and home environment and habitat that it's been living in. And if it's a 5-pound bass, it's been living there for a couple years. Taking it up to the James River and relocating it and dumping it out at the Osborne Park landing and boom. Okay? It's not natural. That is an unnatural relocation of a fish species. Overall, 12.5% of the preferred size largemouth bass were considered vulnerable to being moved from the Chickahominy to the James River by anglers. Only 12%. They're estimating that only 12% of the total bass population. What they should be asking themselves is how much is the percentage of the spawning class population in the Chickahominy, in the Sassafras, okay? In some of these other creeks in the Potomac, okay? I want you guys to think about this for a second. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to be combative to anyone. I am totally pro 100% tournament angling. Live well, weigh-ins, love them, no problem. I also completely respect kayak fishing communities catch, photo, release. They're not in this equation because they're not relocating fish. Okay? They're placing the fish back to where they caught it more or less, probably within a 10 to 20 yard radius. Okay? Is we have to begin to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about these numbers. Their guess is and estimations. The numbers could be very much higher than what they think they are, and anglers are seeing it and reporting it, and the catches are diagnosing it, okay? When people are used to catching a 25-pound bag in the chick, and now it's 18 pounds, 16 pounds, 50. The Potomac River event on May 6th was won with less than 20 pounds. Okay? This time of year, that is a red flag. Okay? But when you look at the Potomac River, think about it. Where do all the tournaments launch from in the Potomac River, mates? They launch from Smallwood, in Marbury, in Maryland, in the Mattawoman Creek, right? Why do you think Mattawoman Creek is freaking straight fire almost every spring and summer in the Potomac River and is the most talked about, the most Google searched creek on the Potomac of all the tribs and all the creeks of the Potomac? Why? Because everybody dumps their fish there. It's not hard to figure out. I caught 17 pounds in Powell's Creek and Aquia Landing, okay? Aquia Creek, Quantico Creek, okay? Belmont Bay, Pohick. Where am I taking those bass to get weighed in? Smallwood. Like everybody else, right? Little club event, little battle series, little local club, little Wednesday nighter. Then MLF comes to town with 200 boats. Then Bass comes to town once or twice with 200 boats. Okay? Over and over and over again. And all the bass get put back in the Potomac in the mat. Right? It's not, you don't got to major in biology to figure this out. Okay? Because we've all seen different areas. No, it's the grass. It's the grass. Everybody wants to blame other things, which are contributing factors, but not the real thing. Because the real thing is where these fish are being released in tournaments. We don't want to talk about that. Okay? Tournament trails don't want to talk about that, but they need to start. And states need to start requiring tournament trails to institute barges and institute mechanisms, and some do. Some events for bass and some events, they absolutely disperse the fish in various areas of the fishery. And kudos for them for doing that. But in ours, fisheries here in the Mid-Atlantic, they need to be doing that now. And it may take legislation, and it may run the risk that bass doesn't come. It may run the risk where a trail series decides, hey, if you do that and you pass that, we're not going to come. And then the county's got to be able to say, okay, we'll try and get someone else to come by. Thank you. Because the fishery is that important to those of us who fish it all year long. I love for bass to come here. I love for MLF to come here, right? I do. But at the end of the day, it's our resource, our fishery, right? They're just renters. I mean, they're renting it for the week, right? You got to have that mentality now. When we're seeing creek after creek fall, trib after trib, decline. And then we have certain areas, James River, Mattawoman on Potomac, Northeast, La Marina up in Upper Bay, bass populations, right? You can go off the pier, the community park, and freaking Northeast Maryland near Anchors Marina and freaking catch a limit of bass 12 to 15 pounds. Trust me, some 12-year-olds and 13-year-old boys do it all the time. Go on YouTube, okay? Because that's where the bass are being put. That's where they're being translocated, mates. So we got to cover that. We got to have that conversation in the community, okay? Translocations by tournament and non-tournament anglers are very low relative to the size of the bass population and are not expected to negatively impact the Chickahominy largemouth bob population. Yeah, let me just cry bullshit on that, okay? The data doesn't support that. What data do we have? Weigh-ins, historical weigh-ins, right? The biologists should look at what the historical catch rates and weigh-ins of bass are for every single tournament from 2005 to 2022, okay? Wouldn't that be a really good indicator as to the health of a population? How do you gauge the population? You can only electrosurvey so many times. And then again, it's a projection. They don't really know, okay? But you can't explain away that you're allowing spawning bass to be translocated 30, 40 miles away from where their bed is. Now, let me ask you this. What happens to that fish who hasn't spawned? Does she just magically find a bed in Northeast River? In the James River? She just magically just gets thrown down the chute and finds a bed somewhere for her young? What happens to that? What happens to all those eggs? What happens to that spawning class? What's their mortality rate? I mean, people need to start waking up and understand that this is something that's been going on for a long time that's easily remedied. Will it cost money? Yes. Easily remedied, though. Observed. When's the last time you saw any of these biologists or any of these DNR or DWR officials at an actual bass event. Like you personally, like they could be there, don't get me wrong, but I mean overseeing the care. The tournaments have to oversee the care, right? Have you ever seen them? You ever watched where the fish go? After they're weighed in, they're carried in that black bag or that red bag, and they're taken over and they're put into that chute, and that chute goes right down to the water, and the fish are all gone. We have no way of knowing what the survival rate is of those fish. We don't. We talk a lot about fish care. That's been a big, big push. But some of it, mates, is just words and rhetoric to placate the environmentalists out there that are trying to limit and shut down a lot of these tournaments across the country in different states. More restrictions. Okay, I can tell you here, there are a lot of people here who want to end tournament fishing in April and May during the spawn. And if you look at regulations in this state, what they've done to stripers and rockfish over the years, don't think that they won't. I mean, bass is a huge tourist and economic engine for the region, don't get me wrong. But don't think that they will be above actually taking steps like they did with stripers and rockfish and limit everything. There are some areas now, most people are unaware of, where regulations keep you from being able to have smallmouth bass in your live well in certain sections of the river during certain times. Okay? There are things that they can do and go down that road. And I don't think anybody wants that to happen, but if we can continue to see the decline of our former fisheries, and what the problem is, what everybody points to is they'll always point back to a recent event where a guy smashed it for 26 pounds. And then it's like, oh, the fishery's great, there's nothing. But what they don't do is they don't go down below the cut line. Okay? Look below the cut line. Go and look at the last BFL event on May 6th on the Potomac River and look below 20th place and below and see how many fish were caught. Now, one could argue it's the anglers, but it's never been that low, mates. It's never been that low, okay? I mean, you got guys at the top that are excellent anglers that are getting a 5-bag limit and getting 15 to 18 pounds, okay? Or 14 to 18 pounds. You get below that 20 spot, and you got excellent anglers, they're at 3 pounds, 5 pounds, 3 pounds, 4 pounds, 5 pounds, 3 pounds, 2 pounds, 2 pounds. Skunk. Okay? People need to wake up, okay, and realize that that's the reality that the fishery faces. Okay? And we're scheduling these events on the Chickahominy and the James River and the Potomac and the Upper Bay, really correlating with what? Forage. We complain about, like, okay, why are the fish growth rates not as high as they used to be? Oh, it's the grass, and oh, it's this, and oh, yeah. It's also the forage, mates. We're hitting the bass with a lot of these tournaments, which is great television. It's great entertainment during a shad spawn, right? Shad spawn, okay? Perch run in Maryland, okay? All these things that are naturally occurring things for that particular species that we are then, right, on top of capitalizing on the bass being triggered by the spawns, shad and forage spawns, okay, and then removing those bass from that area and taking them somewhere else. Okay. Now, people could argue, well, there should be there should be less bass there, Jay, so the shad should be able to proliferate a lot more, and that is true. We did see that in the Quan this year. That's the Occoquan River. I personally believe it was probably one of the better shad numbers, okay? But this is what I'm talking about, mates, when they talk about translocation. I was really glad that, a follower hooked me up with this so I could research this and call some people down south and kind of get their take on this stuff and what they're seeing. Everybody's kind of seeing the same things, mates. So it's kind of time we all start to have this conversation going forward about translocation of tournament bass and live wells. All right, mates.